Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all having a pleasant day. Before we dive in, take a quick moment to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. It really helps keep these conversations going. Today we're talking about a revealing and emotionally layered moment involving Meri Brown, Janelle Brown, and the early days of their plural marriage. Meri is finally opening up about something that's lingered quietly in the background for years, and it turns out it affected her far more deeply than many viewers ever realized. In a sneak peek shared with people ahead of the upcoming Sister Wives one-on-one special, Meri, now 55, spoke honestly about why the early relationship between herself, Janelle, and Kody Brown didn't start on solid footing. One major reason, she says, was Janelle's personal history with Meri's family. Specifically, the fact that Janelle had previously been married to Meri's brother, Adam Barber. That alone would be enough to make anyone pause. But as Meri explains, the emotional strain didn't stop there. Meri recalled that when Kody and Janelle first discussed getting married, they actually planned to do it on her birthday. Let that sink in for a moment. She said Kody's mother eventually shut the idea down, but at first, Kody and Janelle seemed perfectly comfortable with the plan. Their attitude, according to Meri, was essentially, "It doesn't matter, we'll just celebrate your birthday another day." Meri didn't hide her reaction. "Excuse me," she said plainly. "It does matter." And you can almost hear the disbelief in her voice. She explained that starting a marriage and a family relationship, on that note, set the tone in a way that was painful and dismissive. It wasn't just about the date. It was about what that decision represented. Meri went on to say that Kody and Janelle didn't fully consider how much emotion was tied up in the situation, especially given that Janelle had once been married into Meri's family. "There's a lot of emotion there," Meri said, and she repeated it, as if to drive the point home. A lot of emotion. For some background, Janelle married Adam Barber in 1988, and the marriage ended in 1990. That same year, Kody married Meri. Then, 3 years later, in 1993, Kody spiritually married Janelle, officially bringing her into the plural marriage. In an earlier episode of Sister Wives that aired this month, Meri admitted just how difficult that transition was for her. When discussions about Janelle joining the family first began, Meri said it was incredibly hard to process. She described it as something she struggled to wrap her head around on multiple levels, largely because of Janelle's prior marriage to her brother. According to People, Meri said plainly that it was really hard, and definitely a thing for her emotionally. Janelle, for her part, has spoken openly about that first marriage as well. In a November 2024 appearance on the Reality Life with Kate Casey podcast, she described it as very short-lived. She said they may have only truly lived together for about 6 months. Still, the brevity of that marriage didn't erase the emotional weight it carried for Meri. What makes this moment so striking is that Meri is now pulling back the curtain on one of the most uncomfortable and rarely discussed chapters in Sister Wives history. For years, viewers sensed tension, jealousy, and unspoken resentment in the early seasons. Now, Meri is finally acknowledging that Janelle's history with her family played a significant role in those feelings. Before Janelle became Kody Brown's second wife and a central figure in the plural marriage, she was Meri's former sister-in-law. That fact has always hovered awkwardly in the background, mentioned in passing but never fully explored. Until now. Meri admitted that she tried hard to be the supportive first wife. But the truth, she says, is that watching a former family member transition into her spiritual sister wife stirred up complicated emotions she didn't feel allowed to express. In their culture, women are often expected to suppress jealousy, push aside personal discomfort, and focus on what's best for the family as a whole. Looking back, Meri's honesty feels long overdue. It's a quiet acknowledgement that she carried this emotional weight for decades, smiling on the outside, struggling on the inside, and for many longtime viewers, it finally explains why the cracks in the Brown family foundation appeared so early. and why they never truly healed. Meri went on to explain how all of this shaped the way she related to Janelle from the very beginning, why she became guarded, cautious, and emotionally reserved, and why their relationship never quite found solid footing. And that's despite years of effort to appear united, especially for the cameras and for the children. Because there's an important distinction here. It's one thing to welcome another woman into your marriage under the rules of polygamy. It's another thing entirely to welcome someone who already shares an intimate past with your own family. Someone who once sat at holiday tables as a sister-in-law, and then later stood beside you as a wife to the same man. That kind of situation blurs emotional boundaries in ways most people can barely imagine, let alone navigate with grace. Meri's honesty finally confirms what many longtime viewers have quietly suspected all along. The tension between Meri and Janelle wasn't just about clashing personalities, kitchen disagreements, or different communication styles. It went much deeper than that. It was personal, emotional, and never fully resolved. When you look at where each woman was coming from, the imbalance becomes clearer. Meri entered plural marriage young, idealistic, and deeply committed to doing everything right. She believed that swallowing her discomfort was part of her spiritual responsibility. Janelle, on the other hand, approached the family in a more practical, emotionally detached way. That difference meant Meri internalized her pain, while Janelle moved forward, either unaware of or unable to fully engage with the emotional weight of the situation. Over time, that unresolved history became a wall between them, and that wall only grew taller because of Kody's role in the dynamic. He often minimized Meri's feelings, framing her emotional reactions as personal flaws rather than understandable responses to an incredibly complex family structure. That dismissal deepened Meri's sense of isolation and quietly fed her resentment. So, when Meri now admits that Janelle's past marriage to her family affected her feelings, it feels like a long missing puzzle piece finally snapping into place. It explains why Meri often came across as protective, territorial, or wounded in moments involving Janelle. The pain wasn't just about sharing Kody. It was about sharing space with someone who represented a painful overlap of family roles, an emotional collision Meri never had the words or permission to fully process. This revelation also invites viewers to see Janelle's role in a more nuanced light. For years, Janelle has been portrayed as the calm, rational contrast to Meri's emotional intensity. But Meri's admission suggests a different layer. One where Janelle may have benefited from a dynamic in which Meri was expected to just get over it for the sake of family harmony. That dynamic left Meri emotionally stranded, and over time, it played a significant role in her gradual withdrawal from both the marriage and the larger family, especially as Kody's attention drifted further away from her and toward newer relationships. Then came Robyn. Robyn entered the family without the same complicated emotional history. She quickly became the center of Kody's affection and loyalty, leaving Meri to sit with unresolved wounds that were never truly acknowledged, let alone healed. Now, fans are revisiting old episodes with fresh eyes. Moments that once seemed like overreactions or petty tension are being re-examined as signs of deeper, long-buried pain. Pain that Meri is only now, after all these years, finally putting into words. Viewers are now noticing moments from past episodes where Meri's discomfort around Janelle felt sharper, heavier, and more personal than anyone first realized. Scenes that once looked like minor disagreements now read very differently. They look less like petty conflict and more like a woman struggling to live with the memory of a painful emotional crossroads. One she never chose, but was expected to accept quietly and without complaint. The timing of Meri's admission makes this even more powerful. The Brown family is continuing to unravel. Multiple wives have left Kody, and the original vision of plural unity has completely fallen apart. With that collapse has come something new: space for truth. Truths that were once buried under years of keep sweet, smile for the camera expectations, and pressure to maintain appearances at all costs. Meri finally saying out loud that Janelle's past marriage to her family affected her feelings feels like an act of emotional freedom. It's a reclaiming of her own story after decades of being labeled overly sensitive or unreasonable, without anyone fully acknowledging the emotional landmines she was walking through every single day. It also raises some uncomfortable questions, especially about Kody's role. How much responsibility does he bear for creating an environment where women were discouraged from expressing complicated feelings, where pain had to be neatly packaged, minimized, or ignored, and where those same women were criticized when that pain eventually surfaced in ways that disrupted the family's fragile balance? One can't help but wonder, if Meri had been given real space early on to voice her discomfort, and if that discomfort had been met with empathy instead of dismissal, could her relationship with Janelle, and maybe even the family as a whole, have taken a different path? Instead, those feelings were pushed aside, allowed to fester, and later used as proof that Meri was somehow bad at polygamy. Looking at it now, that narrative feels deeply unfair. As fans process Meri's honesty, many are expressing a new level of sympathy for her journey. They're recognizing that her emotional struggles weren't character flaws, but natural responses to an emotionally unsolvable situation. At the same time, this disclosure complicates how some viewers see Janelle. Long portrayed as the most level-headed and emotionally grounded wife, Janelle may have benefited, intentionally or not, from a system that expected Meri to absorb the emotional cost in silence. Meri has been careful not to place direct blame on Janelle. But she makes one thing very clear: the emotional impact was real, lasting, and significant. It shaped years of strained interactions, misunderstandings, and emotional distance that no amount of family meetings or forced bonding exercises could truly fix. Now, as Meri continues to redefine herself outside of the Brown family and explore life beyond a marriage that ultimately failed her, this moment of honesty feels like a turning point, not just for her personal healing, but for how the sister-wives story is understood as a whole. It exposes the emotional cost of polygamy in a way that feels raw, specific, and deeply human. And as Meri keeps unpacking the weight she carried for decades, her admission about Janelle's past marriage doesn't just reopen an old wound. It reveals a fault line that may have shaped the entire Brown family from the very beginning. When Janelle shifted from being Meri's sister-in-law to her sister-wife, it wasn't just a change in marital status. It was a profound emotional shift that blurred family roles in ways fundamentalist polygamy rarely prepares women to handle. Meri's honesty suggests that, while she may have accepted the arrangement intellectually, emotionally she was left adrift, carrying feelings she was never encouraged to explore in a belief system that treats emotional discomfort as personal weakness, rather than as a signal that something deeper needs attention. Those deeper feelings needed care and attention. But instead, emotional suppression became Meri's survival strategy. It allowed the family to keep functioning on the surface while quietly eating away at her sense of security, identity, and belonging underneath it all. Looking back now, it's painfully clear that Meri's guarded nature and heightened sensitivity were never just personality quirks. They were protective responses to an environment where her emotional reality was consistently minimized, especially by Kody. He often praised Janelle for being independent and practical, while criticizing Meri for being too emotional. Seen through today's lens, that comparison feels deeply unfair, considering the emotional weight Meri was carrying alone. Janelle's previous marriage to Meri's brother meant that every interaction between the two women came loaded with history, shared memories, overlapping family spaces, and an unspoken awareness that certain boundaries had been crossed. Not by choice, but by circumstance. Over time, that history likely made it harder for Meri to confidently occupy her role as first wife, particularly as Janelle carved out a strong position in the family as the one who worked outside the home, contributed financially, and often aligned more closely with Kody's practical worldview. Meanwhile, Meri was left feeling emotionally exposed and increasingly sidelined. That imbalance grew even more complex when Christine entered the family. Christine brought warmth and emotional openness, which helped in some ways, but also shifted the family dynamic. Christine openly expressed jealousy and worked through those feelings out loud, often receiving support in return. Meri, on the other hand, had already learned a difficult lesson: that expressing discomfort, especially when it involved Janelle, was more likely to be met with resistance than reassurance. So, Meri learned to swallow her feelings, and tragically, that habit was later used against her, particularly when the emotional distance between her and Kody became impossible to ignore. What makes Meri's admission so striking now is how early this emotional fracture began, long before Robin entered the picture, long before the family's collapse played out publicly. It suggests that the seeds of dysfunction were planted at the very foundation of the plural marriage, where emotional honesty was sacrificed in favor of appearing spiritually successful. As Meri reflects on this period with the clarity that only time and self-work can bring, her words carry a quiet sense of grief. Not just for what happened, but for what never had the chance to happen. The conversations that were never held, the validation she never received, the emotional safety she never experienced in a marriage that demanded so much from her while offering so little in return. Now, viewers are also asking harder questions about Janelle's role. Did she fully understand the emotional impact of her presence in Meri's life? Or was she, too, operating within a system that rewarded emotional detachment and discouraged empathy whenever it complicated the family narrative? Janelle has often spoken about valuing logic over emotion, but Meri's honesty suggests that this dynamic, while not malicious, may have unintentionally deepened Meri's pain. It points to a fundamental mismatch in emotional processing styles that the family never truly addressed. And through it all, Kody's role cannot be overlooked. As the central figure in the plural marriage, he held enormous influence over how emotional conflicts were handled, or ignored. Time and again, he chose convenience over compassion, treating Meri's emotional struggles as obstacles to manage rather than signals that something was deeply wrong. It became a pattern, one that left Meri feeling unchosen, unheard, and emotionally disposable. And when Robin later entered the family with her strong emphasis on emotional expression and vulnerability, the contrast became impossible to ignore. Kody was suddenly able and willing to engage with those same emotional traits in Robin that he had long rejected in Meri. That only widened the fracture and reinforced a painful belief Meri had carried for years, that her pain wasn't just inconvenient, it was somehow less important. Today, that imbalance feels glaringly obvious to viewers. Meri was expected to handle emotional complexity quietly and gracefully, while others were given room to be messy, emotional, and supported. The double standard is hard to miss. As Meri speaks more openly about how Janelle's past marriage to her family affected her, it becomes clear that her departure from the Brown family isn't just about leaving Kody. It's about reclaiming emotional agency, something she was denied for decades. She's finally allowing herself to say, without apology, that her feelings mattered, even when the system she lived in told her they didn't. That shift is resonating deeply with fans. Many see Meri's story as a larger reflection on the emotional cost of polygamy, especially for first wives. They're often expected to pave the way, absorb the discomfort, and set the emotional tone for the family, without ever receiving the same care or consideration in return. In a time when conversations about mental health, boundaries, and emotional validation are becoming more open and accepted, Meri's honesty feels especially timely. It highlights the sharp contrast between the expectations placed on women in fundamentalist structures and the emotional autonomy so many are now fighting to reclaim. While Janelle has moved forward with confidence, independence, and a sense of peace outside her marriage to Kody, Meri's journey has been far more winding. It's been marked by deep self-reflection, grief, and a slow process of rediscovering who she is. And yet, that very process is what makes her current honesty so meaningful. Healing doesn't always look like instant freedom. More often, it looks like revisiting painful truths with compassion, and finally allowing yourself to acknowledge hurt you were once told to ignore. As the sister wives story continues to unfold, Meri's willingness to confront the emotional reality of Janelle's past marriage adds a level of depth and authenticity that challenges the simplified narratives viewers were once given. It's a reminder that behind every family conflict is a web of untold stories, unspoken feelings, and unresolved pain. As fans continue to unpack this revelation, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. Meri Brown's feelings were never the problem. The refusal to recognize them was. And now that the silence has been broken, the truth is hard to ignore. It opens the door to even more revelations, ones that may finally tell the full story of what it truly took to keep the Brown family together for as long as they did. As Meri continues to sit with truths she once buried, the emotional ripple effects of Janelle's past marriage feel less like a footnote in Sister Wives' history and more like a defining trauma, one that shaped her entire adult life. Looking back, Meri isn't just remembering moments of jealousy or discomfort. She's recalling a deep sense of displacement, a feeling that her family boundaries were crossed in ways she never consented to, but was expected to accept as part of her spiritual duty. That expectation, to prioritize everyone else's comfort for the sake of plural harmony, became the emotional blueprint for Meri's marriage to Kody. It was a model that required constant self-erasure, quiet endurance, and emotional silence. The longer Meri stayed silent about how deeply Janelle's presence affected her, the more isolated she became, especially as the family storyline evolved in a way that painted Janelle as logical, easygoing, and steady, while Meri was increasingly labeled as sensitive, difficult, or emotionally unpredictable. Seen now, those labels feel painfully oversimplified. It's hard to overstate how destabilizing it must have been for Meri to watch someone who once shared a family bond through her brother step into the most intimate space of her own marriage. That kind of transition blurs emotional boundaries in a way no amount of religious structure can neatly resolve. And yet, Meri was never given the space to explore that confusion. She was never encouraged to say out loud how unnatural it felt. She was never reassured that her discomfort didn't mean she was spiritually weak. Instead, she internalized a damaging message. If she struggled, the failure was hers alone. That belief followed Meri for decades. It shaped how she interacted with Janelle, with Kody, and even with herself. Over time, the unresolved tension hardened into emotional distance. The relationship between Meri and Janelle became courteous, but guarded, cooperative, but never truly close. And viewers who once dismissed their disconnect as a simple personality clash are now reconsidering it as the result of an emotional wound that was never acknowledged, let alone healed. What makes Meri's admission land so powerfully now is the timing. The carefully curated image of the Brown family has fully collapsed, There's no longer a structure left to protect, no illusion to maintain. That freedom has given Meri the space to finally speak the truth without fear of destabilizing a family system that no longer exists. In doing so, she exposes the emotional cost of a system that valued appearances over authenticity, one that expected women to smile through pain and call it spiritual growth. This also forces a harder look at Kody's role. As the husband who facilitated Janelle's transition into the family, he carried a responsibility to ensure that Meri felt emotionally safe and respected. Again and again, he failed to do that. Instead, he dismissed her feelings as inconvenient or exaggerated, while praising Janelle's emotional distance as maturity. That double standard didn't just minimize Meri's experience, it reinforced a hierarchy where emotional repression was rewarded and emotional honesty was punished. When Robin later entered the family and was encouraged to openly express vulnerability, the contrast became impossible to ignore. Suddenly, the very traits Meri had been criticized for were celebrated in someone else. That realization cut deep. It wasn't that Meri's pain had ever been too much. It was simply unwanted. That understanding seems to sit at the heart of Meri's recent reflections. She's beginning to see that her discomfort around Janelle wasn't a personal flaw. It was a natural response to an emotionally complex situation that no one helped her navigate. As fans take in this new layer of the story, many are expressing a deeper empathy for Meri's journey. They're recognizing that her struggles weren't isolated moments of weakness, but part of a long-standing pattern of emotional neglect, one that began the moment her family boundaries were blurred and her feelings were pushed aside. At the same time, this revelation complicates the long-standing narrative around Janelle, who has often been presented as the emotionally steady and grounded wife. While there's no indication that Janelle ever intended to cause harm, her entry into the family carried emotional consequences that were never fully acknowledged, consequences that Meri was left to shoulder largely on her own. That doesn't make Janelle a villain, but it does highlight how systems like polygamy can quietly pit women against one another by forcing them into roles that ignore emotional reality in favor of convenience and structure. In that sense, Meri's honesty feels like a quiet act of rebellion, a refusal to keep protecting a storyline that came at the cost of her own emotional health. By speaking openly about how Janelle's past marriage to her family affected her, Meri is also pushing back against the long-held idea that she simply couldn't adjust. Instead, she's suggesting something far more reasonable, that she was asked to adapt to a deeply destabilizing situation without support, validation, or empathy. That distinction matters. It shifts the focus away from blaming individual women and toward questioning the system that demanded their silence. As Meri rebuilds her life outside of the Brown family, this clarity seems to be bringing her a sense of peace she didn't have before. Not because the past no longer hurts, but because she's finally allowing herself to name that hurt without shame. And that alone can be profoundly freeing. For viewers who have watched Meri struggle for over a decade, this moment feels significant. It invites reflection on how many other emotional truths may have been buried beneath the polished surface of the Brown family narrative. How many moments of pain were dismissed as spiritual weakness? How different might things have been if honesty had been valued over harmony from the very beginning? As Meri's admission continues to spark conversation, one truth is becoming harder to deny. Her feelings were never irrational. Her reactions were never unwarranted. And her discomfort was never trivial. By acknowledging the impact of Janelle's past marriage to her family, Meri isn't rewriting history. She's completing it. She's filling in the emotional gaps that were left unexplored for far too long. And in doing so, she offers a rare glimpse into the unseen emotional labor that held the Brown family together for years. It's a reminder that behind every carefully edited episode was a woman carrying a truth she was never allowed to speak. Until now.